Beautiful. Good morning, friends. And welcome again to First Congo. Last week, we started a new worship series focused on the power of spiritual technologies. We looked at the Psalms last week and reflected on how they, like every technology, are an external tool that forms our internal capacities. This morning, I want to think with you, in fact, about thinking itself, how it is conditioned and routinized and patterned in fundamental ways. You know, in a world as siloed as ours is, it can feel like different groups of people rarely think in similar ways. It's well documented how folks these days can hardly agree on a single set of facts, let alone hold a common opinion. Who won the 2020 presidential election? Opinions differ. Is the world round or flat? Apparently that's debatable. Is coffee or milk or red meat or aspartame bad for you? Depends on whom you ask. With the rise of social media and other digital forms of connecting, the silos seem to be getting smaller and deeper and more stubborn because you can find like-minded folks and spend a whole lot of time consuming content that reinforces your like-mindedness. However, despite all of these forces, there is one subject about which different groups of people seem to agree. Studies show that across political and generational and cultural and racial differences, folks from various groups can find common ground when it comes to one thing: the world is ending. Now, to be sure, the silos don't agree on the reasons. Religious conservatives think that we're in the end times, as described in scriptures. Secularists tend to focus more on climate catastrophe as the cause. Democrats point to the end of basic civil and governmental norms. Meanwhile, Republicans decry so-called gender propaganda or immigration or the possibility of terrorist attacks. It seems that these days, even as people still hotly debate whether Luigi Mangione is a hero or a villain, and shout each other down as to whether vaccines are a good thing, even as we continue to find community with smaller and smaller groups of people who think more and more exactly as we do, the one thing that some people from differing perspectives can agree on is that the world is about to end. Maybe this is what you think. Maybe you read the news or scroll through the posts and you agree things are real bad. So bad, in fact, that we might not make it. Or maybe every fiber in your being wants to shout no. Maybe you're in that dwindling group of people who believe that human beings will do what we've always done and survive seemingly impossible circumstances. I'm not going to issue my own verdict or even volunteer an opinion because first, I don't know. It would be convenient and even comforting to join a camp, even if you decide that the world is ending, as terrifying as that prospect might be. Sometimes certainty, even terrible certainty, is easier to live with than mystery. But at the end of the day, as I listen to folks trying to convince me in one way or the other, the truth is none of us knows. The second reason I can't join up with either the doomsday prophets or the glorious optimists is something I once heard the author N.K. Jemisin say. I've talked before about this author, the famed creator of the speculative fiction series The Broken Earth, and I've mentioned what she once said as she introduced a compilation of apocalyptic short stories. Reflecting on all the imaginings about how the world will end, N.K. Jemisin reminded her listeners that the world has always been ending for someone, somewhere. Now, she doesn't mean the entire world, I don't think. I take her to mean instead The way the world ends for too many families whose children die as a result of the chronic gun violence in their neighborhoods, or the unrelenting poverty of their communities, or the endless wars assaulting their people. I take her to mean that the world has always been ending for people in places like most of Latin America, where national economies are both constrained and depleted by the United States, even as they are barred from entering the country that has ravaged their agricultural systems and manipulated their governments. I take her to mean that the world has always been ending for folks who love the same gender, or who express their own gender in a way some folks might not expect, risking the violences of bigots every day of their lives. I take her to mean that whether it's the polluted air concentrated in only certain neighborhoods, or it's the pure hatred that murders every kind of other, or it's the greed of the few coupled with the apathy of the many, I take her to mean that disease and violence and injustice have always been ending the world for someone, somewhere. In just a few days, on August 28th, we will mark 71 years since Emmett Till was murdered. For those who don't know or don't remember, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy from Chicago who, in the summer of 1955, was visiting his family in a small town in Mississippi. One day, Emmett Till, who was black, spoke to Carolyn Bryant, who was white. What he said, or how he said it, angered Mrs. Bryant's husband, so Mrs. Bryant's husband decided to rally a few other men to beat Emmett Till, and to shoot Emmett Till, and to tie weights to his body before throwing his corpse into the Tallahatchie River. And so it was that on August 28th, 1955, Emmett Till's whole world ended. 3 days later, his body was found, swollen and broken and unrecognizable. Mamie Till Mobley, his mother, along with all of the friends and family who had seen in their beloved Emmett what people see in any 14-year-old child, hope and potential and the future of the world, all of that ended. Mamie Till Mobley and her family was heartbroken and grief-stricken and wading through a dystopian wasteland of their very own. And so it strikes me that if we here and now want to learn something of what to do in a time when it feels like the world is ending, then there may be no better guide to consult than a black woman contending with the lynching of her only son. A few days later, after August 28th, 1955, Mamie Till Mobley became a national figure. Her strength and her courage and her moral witness became a model to which people still return again and again. I'm returning to her now, not because of the incredible strength it must have taken to insist, as she did, that her son's funeral be open casket, so that the world could see the way racists ravaged his body. I'm returning to her now, not because she insisted on forgiveness, despite how easy and natural it would have been to hate the men who killed her son. I'm returning to her now because I believe she models for us how to think in a moment when the world seems to be ending. When asked about whether she hated the men who ended her son's life and destroyed her whole world, she is recorded as having said this: "I don't have 1 minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life." This is a woman who was contending with the death of her only child and also the reality of the racist norms that permitted those men to kill her son. The same norms that, by the way, ultimately led to those murderers' acquittal in a court of law. This is a woman who was bearing the brunt of a national history that had time and time again denied the value of black folks' lives. This is a woman who was facing very real threats to her own life as she spoke out and spoke up and wouldn't quit talking about the importance of justice. In the midst of all that, she talks to us not about vengeance or corruption, She doesn't throw her hands up in despair or tighten her fists in hatred. She meets the end of the world and talks to us about time, what she has time to think about and what she doesn't. After Mamie Till Mobley's world ended, she told people that she didn't even have a minute to hate. And so I'm wondering, do you? As we confront the harsh realities of this moment, as some of us hold the all too real possible reality that we ourselves or someone we love could be taken to a camp without notice or deported to some other country without a defensible reason, do you have a minute to hate? As we face the efforts of this regime to roll back the protections and the programs that have enabled some of us to live, be it healthcare or employment laws or even democratic representation, do you have a minute to hate? As we look at climate change and collapse and the rise of AI data centers and their incredible costs to the environment, do you have a minute to hate or to despair or to throw up your hands or to tighten your fists? In other words, I ask you, friends, what are you giving your time over to think? That's what Mamie Till Mobley is talking about. Not just how we use our time, but also how we use our thinking. How and what we think shapes our reality. It determines where we put our energy and whether we even have energy. How and what we think is affected by everything we do or see or watch or listen to, because it inspires in us thoughts. And those thoughts actually structure and restructure our brains at a physiological level. People have known this in one way or another for a very long time, especially those who are contending with the end of the world. Take the Apostle Paul, for instance. By the time he was writing to the small collection of Christians that met in the city of Thessalonica, he had been beaten and jailed in a nearby city. He had been derided and demeaned for being a follower of Jesus. Paul had witnessed people being stoned to death for being Christians. This was a man who knew something of what it meant for the world to feel like it was ending. And even so, he believed that there was not time, not even a minute, to devote to hatred or to despair or to revenge. And so he writes to the persecuted Christians meeting in Thessalonica these words. You can follow along in your bulletin. He writes, "Be at peace among yourselves. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, to admonish the idlers, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with all of them. See that none of you repays evil for evil, but always seeks to do good to one another and to all. Rejoice always. Pray without ceasing. Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the Spirit. Do not despise prophecies, but test everything. Hold fast to what is good. Abstain from every form of evil. Rejoice. Give thanks. Pray without ceasing." Paul is aware of how easy it would be for those of us in world-ending circumstances to think without ceasing about how bad things are. He knows how tempting despair can be, how alluring hatred feels. He knows how people can spend all their time thinking in ways that sap their energy rather than nourish it for action. And so he writes to that ancient collection of misfit Jesus followers, and he tells them to pray, to train their minds on the power and love called God, to return again and again to that eternal presence. Not to spend even 1 minute on hate or despair or any other distraction. Pray, he tells them, without ceasing. That all sounds good, you might be thinking. Sure, I'd love to think less about my despair or my hatred, but I don't know how. If you find yourself wondering such a thing, I invite you to consider your technology. Consider, yes, what you're feeding your brain, the posts and the videos and the articles and the images and all the rest, but I also invite you to consider an ancient technology that people have used across cultures and religions, all for the purpose of training their minds and guiding their thinking. I'm talking about the technology of prayer beads. This is a technology that's fairly simple to use. You take a string that has some number of beads on it, and you hold that string. And you take your fingers and you move from one bead to the next. And each time you do, each time you let a bead pass through your fingers, you say a word or a phrase. Love, perhaps. Jesus, maybe. Bless me, Lord. Guide me, O God. Thank you, Holy One. And with each time you pick up your string of beads, and every time you move through it, praying, moving your attention back to hope, back to wholeness, back to love. Every time you do that, that's a minute you devote not to hatred or to despair, but to thinking about how you are not alone and you are not defeated. And you have time and space and the gift of being alive right now to do whatever work is yours to do. Nurturing justice or beauty or love in a world that's always ending, but is always beginning too. Friends, the God of Paul, the God to whom Mamie Till Mobley prayed at her son's funeral, the God who is always present, that God longs for you. That God is ready to suffuse your life and your thinking and your energy so that you can return to reality with power and love. Do you have a minute? There are technologies available to us that can help train and retrain our minds to return to liberation and to justice and to hope. Do you have a minute? Even as the world feels like it might be ending in the near future, it needs those of us ready to greet it and to love it and to nurture it right now. Do you have a minute? May it be so, and amen. We now worship God as He presents our offering.